Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second event in our Research Roots series. Today's event is called Queer Places, Feelings, Emotions, and Ways of Rebuilding Intangible Heritage. I am Giorgia Tolfo, and I'm in conversation with Luke Fawcett and Vicky Iglikowski-Broad. Research Roots is, for those who are not familiar with it, our new annual event series that encourages audiences to engage with our collections in new and innovative ways. Our 2025 program is dedicated to emotions, senses, and feelings in the archives, and it examines the way in which we can navigate the archives and how they are intertwined with emotions and senses. Before we start with presentations, I'd like to introduce our speakers today and also do a little bit of housekeeping. The session is approximately 1 hour and it will finish at 2 p.m. today. We will begin with presentations by our speakers, Luke Fawcett and then Vicky Iglikowski-Broad, and that will be followed by a short conversation between us, and you have the opportunity to also ask Luke and Vicky questions. Please add them to the Q&A section. The event is run through Zoom webinar. As I mentioned, there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, so please submit your questions there at any point throughout the event, and we will come back during the Q&A session. My colleagues will be sharing some guidance regarding this Q&A function in the chat, so keep an eye there. Should you need any technical support during the event, also please reach out to them via the chat and they will be able to assist you at any point. Please note also that this event is being recorded and it will be uploaded to the YouTube channel in due course. We have also enabled live captions, so you can access these at the bottom of your screen by clicking on live transcript, show subtitle. Alternatively, you can hide this if you find them distracting, so you can just follow the same process. So now I will introduce the first speaker, so Luke Fawcett. He is a Liverpool-based artist, he's a researcher and urban designer whose work explore queer heritage, memory and place. He has a background in architecture and urban design, and Luke's practice sits at the intersection of spatial design and storytelling, looking at transforming overlooked environments into sites of queer visibility and connection. He's the founder of Queer Places, a creative research project mapping and amplifying LGBTQIA and plus histories through public art community workshops and collaborative interventions, and we will hear about it shortly. Alongside his artistic practice, Luke teaches in architecture design and has contributed to national work on LGBTQAI plus inclusive design with the Royal Institute of British Architects. His current project, If These Walls Could Talk, an LGBTQ plus heritage trail, reclaims Liverpool Street as a living archive, telling queer histories through vibrant site-specific installations. Vicky Iglikowski-Broad instead is Principal Records and Diverse History Specialist at the National Archives, and she holds an MA in Women and Gender History. Her research interests include the history of British society and culture, gender and sexuality, and 20th century social change and protest. Recent work includes original research on the registration of LGBT plus Switchboard as a charity, which explores chancery work exploring chancery records of Anne Lister and Anne Walker, and she has also worked on classified adverts in the International Times that have been added to police records. She has pioneered consultation on inclusive research guidance and the ethics of using queer state records in public engagement. Vicky is currently a collaborator on the major AHRC-funded project 100 Years of the Well of Loneliness, which explore the lasting impact of Radcliffe Hall's radical novel and its significance for the LGBTQ plus communities. She's also working on inclusive creative practices project using dance, for example, and exploring hidden disabilities or theatre performance to explore records of LGBTQ plus activism. Previous projects include leading the Suffragette 100 project, and which has resulted in innovative research-led public engagement. So as you can hear, we've got two people who are highly involved in revealing and working with hidden stories and histories of activism. And I'm really happy to have them here today and to present their projects, which I believe will really be inspiring. A little bit of introduction about the National Archives, again, for those who are not familiar with this archive. The National Archives is the state archive, and we have loads of collections, but as far as it regards LGBTQ plus histories, we have records that provide us with an insight into how the government interacted with and viewed LGBTQ plus communities in the past. The state's attempts to regulate sexuality and gender has paradoxically left us with many potential sources for experiences of LGBTQ plus people in public or semi-public spaces. And so while these records can often document past injustices and can be a bit distressing to look at, they have in various cases also unlocked stories of resistance and have provided, as we will see, fragments and traces that have allowed us to reconstruct vanished places, for example, but also highlighting the importance of spaces and places for community to grow and feel protected. Today, we will be hearing from them and from two specific projects that look to rebuild intangible queer heritage. First, Luke will talk us about Queer Places, his creative archiving project, which is celebrating the vibrant and humble and sometimes filthy LGBTQ plus spaces of Liverpool's past. Present, but also future, I would say. We will then hear from Vicky Iglikowski-Broad about a project that she has led in collaboration with the National Trust and, of course, the National Archives, which saw the recreation of the London's most bohemian rendezvous and queer-friendly club of the 30s, the Caravan Club. Without further ado, now I would like to give space to Luke to present his project. So over to you, Luke.
Oh, thank you so much. I'll just quickly share my screen, and if you could let me know if you can see that. Is that all okay?
Yes, that's perfect.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm also so excited to be presenting alongside Vicky, whose research on the Caravan Club and LGBTQ plus histories has been incredibly inspiring to see. So yeah, I feel really lucky to be part of today's discussion. So thank you to the team at the National Archives as well for the invitation. So my contribution to today's discussion is going to be sharing the story of my project, which is Queer Places, which essentially celebrates Liverpool's LGBTQ plus spaces, past, present, and future. And I thought it would be nice to start off with a bit of a background to the project and just share some of the work that I do. So the project first launched in 2023 as part of Homotopia Festival. And for that, I created a booklet and a digital archive that brought together the research, artwork, and community engagement really as a way of celebrating Liverpool's LGBTQ plus history. And since then, we've hosted our first exhibition in the city, and having this physical space completely transformed the project. It gave us somewhere to run workshops, to gather memories, and most importantly, to hand the space over to other local artists. And that ethos of collaboration has really remained at the heart of the project. So much queer history exists in people's homes and within their lived memories. And it's really through this sharing and co-creation that the work has begun to take on new forms and really come to life. So building on this year, the project has taken on two exciting new directions. And the first is an arts-led heritage trail, which again will be featuring as part of Homotopia Festival. And that will be working with five artists to take over walls, windows, and streets across Liverpool, bringing the hidden stories of queer life back into the city centre through vibrant art-led installations. And then the second is really looking at the future of our community and a lot of the stories and research and lived experiences that I've gathered through the work of Queer Places are now helping to shape national guidance with the Royal Institute of British Architects, which I'm really fortunate to be leading on a project with them working at the intersections of architecture, urban design, and community engagement. So Queer Places is not just about remembering the spaces that we've lost to our history, but it's also become about making sure the spaces that we create today and in the future are inclusive, safe, and are more reflective of our communities. So, Queer Places is a project that has deeply shaped my creative practice as an artist and is something that is incredibly personal to me because as a queer person who has a background in architecture and is now practicing in urban design, I for a long time felt quite uncomfortable with how my community is represented or rather erased from the built environment. And looking at the context of Liverpool, its original gay town evolved around Queen Square with venues like the Magic Clock Pub and the Stark Hotel, which are pictured here, being known as gay bars from as early as the 1930s. Yet today there is no trace of them if you were to look in our city archives. They were demolished in the 1970s to make way for the St. John Shopping Centre, which and the bus terminal that is there today. And without the stories that I've been lucky enough to hear from the queer elders that I've met through my life, I'd have no way of knowing that these spaces ever existed. So I decided I wanted to create a project that focused on documenting the lived experiences of queer communities, in particular, looking at the spaces that these people have used and lived in both past and present. And through my residency with Homotopia, I connected with a curator at the Museum of Liverpool who helped me to engage with their LGBTQ plus collection. And my first task for this project was trying to understand what was held within our existing archives across Liverpool. And what I realised was there are, of course, many gaps. What I had found in particular was information missing about the lived experiences of queer people. And something that baffled me the most was not being able to see what our historic landmarks and spaces looked like. And worse still, LGBTQ plus people, like many other minoritized groups, were often misrepresented, depicted as criminals, mentally ill, or through biased, racist, and queerphobic narratives. And I know that these histories are not a true representation of our timelines. And through engaging directly with the community, pictures of a more empowering, liberating, and intimate past emerge. One, especially, that was often associated with an address, where our communities had gathered not just for sex, but for friendship, for laughter, dancing, and ultimately queer joy. So, after doing this initial research, I became fascinated by how marginalized communities often create and activate spaces without the formal input of an architect. Instead, we shape our environments through our lived experiences and our ephemerality. So, from bathhouses to public toilets, these overlooked everyday spaces hold significant meaning to people. So, this led me to begin exploring how we can use place as a way of archiving a memory, ensuring that these important stories are not lost to history, but it also became about correcting archival silences, in particular celebrating queer joy in our timelines, which is something that we rarely get to see. And as I uncover these addresses and through the conversations I have with people, mapping becomes a crucial part of my research. And I think this reveals how queer spaces have shifted and evolved over time, often forming distinct neighborhoods that become home to these communities. But these spaces, even today, are constantly under threat, eroded by urban redevelopment, and with many of them only surviving in people's living memory. So, with little to no trace in city archives, their rich history really is at risk of being lost forever. And that's why my practice is focused around trying to rebuild some of these spaces, both digitally and physically. So I use the memories of those who experienced them firsthand to bring them back to life so that we have a way of seeing and engaging with our past. And one of the earliest known gay bars in Queen Square was the Magic Clock Pub, which was first described to me as a small, smoky, dimly lit space with just a handful of tables. And it was a place of secrecy and survival where mostly gay men gathered on their lunch breaks or after work, seeking connection in a world that criminalized their existence. And this tiny, seedy venue was a lifeline to our community from as early as the 1930s. Yet today it has completely vanished. There are no photographs of its interior, no trace of the people who once filled it with life, and not a plaque or anything to commemorate it for its place in our history. And since I couldn't rely on institutional records, I turned to some of the people that I'd managed to find who had actually lived within these spaces. And one of those people is Jo Stanley. And I first came across Jo's story through a textile piece that she had created for the Museum of Liverpool. And she had once worked at the Magic Clock as a barmaid and had really beautiful and vivid memories, not just of the space itself, but of the many people that she would share really beautiful and intimate moments with. And she recalled one regular in particular, Daisy, also known as Jeffrey, who wore a distinct jacket that Jo remembers in lots of detail. And Jo was one of the only people that I had managed to find with such a vivid memory of this space, um, really brought to life by her fascination with fabrics. And through Jo's descriptions, we began to see the magic clock come back to life. From the hammered copper bar, the red leather stools, the scent of beer, cigarettes hanging in the air, and the music that was playing from the jukebox. And one of the moments that was so special to me whilst talking with her was her memory that she would often have around the ladies' room. And Jo highlighted how this room just off from the main bar served as a really important space for people that cross-dressed at the time. And she described it as a seedy, grubby, cracked green-tiled ladies' toilet where you never knew who you're going to find in there. Jo often had very vivid and beautiful memories of encountering people who used this room, where she would find herself sharing mascara with the figures that she'd pass in there. And although the door said ladies, she viewed it as a degendered space where people could be found adjusting their clothing, doing their makeup, and just physically existing as a queer person. So by building from Joe's memories, we spent a lot of time over coffee and Zoom calls to put together a rare glimpse of this place, one Easter Sunday in 1969. And the magic clock is currently one of five examples that I've been able to recreate in this detail at this stage. And I think this represents how my research is not complete, and I don't think it ever will be. But instead, the project has really become about celebrating the unique memories that individuals have within our community of these places. And their memories and the artifacts that they collect in their homes provide a window into our past, which I feel deeply inspired by. And I also think to add to this, it's important to say that these models not necessarily accurate, but again represent those unique memories that individuals have been so open to share with me. And they are often built around personal memories of music, of textures, smells, drinks, people, intimacy, and ultimately their joy. And I feel really lucky to have been invited into people's homes where I've been shown incredible images, artifacts, and memorabilia relating to the places that our city archives do not represent. So my work has really become more than just visualizing historic queer places, but giving people a way to reclaim, celebrate, and share their history. But as I mentioned before, queer places isn't just about the past. It's equally about how we remember and protect our spaces today. And a big part of my practice has become the exercise of listening, of collaborating, dreaming, and imagining with others. So a lot of my work is connecting generations of queer people together to share their memories and their collective visions for the future. So in Liverpool, I've been working closely with communities to map and reimagine queer spaces, everything from the lost venues of the Magic Clock to grassroots organisations and current cultural spaces. And much of this history doesn't survive in archives, but it lives within people's day-to-day lives, in their homes, through their stories and their local networks. So by bringing these voices together, the project creates a living archive that belongs to the community itself. And this work also looks at how we can sustain spaces today, spaces that offer safety, visibility, and belonging, whether that's a bar, a bookshop, a youth service, or even a football pitch. And it's about making sure that younger generations can connect to older ones, building these intergenerational relationships where knowledge, support, and joy can truly be shared. So yeah, while the project began with remembering, it's evolved to now ask how do we protect what we have today, and how can we dream new queer futures into being. And out of this work of remembering and protecting has come one of the most exciting new strands for the project, which is a Queer Places Heritage Trail here in Liverpool, which I'm a lead artist for as part of Homotopia Festival this November. And this project is called If These Walls Could Talk, and it is a citywide exhibition that takes queer history out of the archive and places it directly into the streets of Liverpool. And the whole concept behind this is instead of a single gallery space, the city itself becomes the exhibition with windows, cafes, independent shops, and cultural venues. Featuring living installations, each one telling a different story of queer life in the city. And for this, we're working with 5 artists and each bringing their own practice and perspective to the trail. Some are drawing on their personal archives, some from historic research, and others still from their lived memory today, creating site-specific installations that speak directly to their chosen location. So an independent bookshop, for example, will become a window into a trans archivist's home. A community centre will mark its 50 years of LGBTQ plus charity work in the city with a sculptural installation in the window. And a coffee shop will be celebrating the grassroots organisations that are working in Liverpool today, reminding us that queer history isn't only something in the past, but also something alive and unfolding in the present. And in each case, these everyday spaces are going to be transformed into portals, revealing stories that are usually hidden or overlooked. And what excites me the most about this trail is that it doesn't ask people to step into a gallery space or an institution, and it meets them in the places that they are already using day to day. And it makes queer history unavoidable and hopefully weaves it into the city and daily life. Um, so I'd like to finish with just saying my practice as an artist really is centered around creatively engaging with history, and engaging creatively with archives for me is an act of regeneration. It breathes new life into the forgotten stories and it reconnects us with these lost histories. And for a lot of people, traditional archives often feel static and locked away or tucked into personal collections, which makes them really hard to see and engage with. But through engaging with them with art and storytelling, they become more dynamic and accessible and continue to evolve. So, yeah, I'd like to end by saying that queer history thrives when we engage with it creatively. Museums and archives are incredibly important spaces for this, but so too is bringing these stories into our streets, into our homes, and into our everyday spaces where they can continue to grow and evolve. And there's some writing which we did in a creative writing workshop a few years ago, which I just love to use as a summary of. Um, I think that where we should look instead is where this history currently really resides, and that is often within our homes. Um, and home is where queer history resides, where silent archivists tuck in away our joys and struggles into books and boxes. We build sacred shrines to our past, trinkets adorned upon bookshelves, posters draped as testaments to who we are, and glittery coats of armour unfold a lifetime from the closet. Our homes behold a history that the world has tried to destroy. Yet here it is safe and it is ours. What are you leaving behind? Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Luke. That was fantastic, fascinating, and also bringing joy, which is always a good additional feeling. I would like to now introduce Vicky and hand it over to you.
Thank you. Luke, that was absolutely wonderful. Right, everyone, bear with me while I just get my slides up.
And it's also fascinating seeing what people are doing.
Yeah, thank you for
In
sharing in the
chat.
chat.
Thanks for
Giorgia, can you let me know if that is showing okay?
it. Can you make it? Yes, perfect. That's it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, I'm really excited and inspired by Luke's content there. So thank you. I love the idea of getting out of the archives, and that's very much what we were doing with the Caravan Club project as well, but something we really need to do more of. Meet people where they're at, I think is a wonderful way of putting it. So hello everyone. It's really lovely to be here and see so many of you online and engaged and seeing the projects you're working on. Um, so I'm just going to explain a little bit about myself. Giorgia did cover some earlier, but just for context before I dive into the project. So I'm Vicky. I'm a cis bi white woman. I've got blonde hair and glasses and a wonky, quirky smile. And I work at the National Archives as Principal Diverse Histories Record Specialist, kind of a wordy title. But in practice, that means I research and engage people in collections that generally relate to women's lives, migration, Black British history, and in particular, I focus and specialise in queer history. So I'm a bit of a generalist. I move around a lot of different records and research them. And so in practice, this also means delving into the archives, finding new stories, working to increase access to material because there are these barriers that Luke was very much reflecting on, and then trying to promote these through public engagement activities. Which is a really exciting part of the job. So, working on things like podcasts, events, exhibitions, creative projects, working with our education and outreach teams, all those sorts of things. But today I'm actually going to be talking about an old project, but one that had a lot of connection to the kind of theme and the kind of creative archiving project run by Luke. So do indulge me while I talk about this project. It felt like too good a fit not to bring to this event. So I think it's interesting that although there are a lot of synergies with the Luke's work, thinking about space, there are a lot of differences. And hopefully, I guess some of this will come out in the conversations we have. But particularly of note is that the archives at the heart of this project are government collections, and they come from a state perspective. And so that's a really different standpoint from the kind of community and living memory side of things that we've been hearing about. So I guess hopefully this presentation will offer a bit of a provocation about the power of state records. And maybe we can discuss the liberatory potential they can hold, whether we believe they do hold that or don't hold that. So to give you some context for this particular project, it came about in 2016 to mark 50 years since the 1967 Sexual Offences Act in 2027. So we were working across both those years. And apologies to anyone who's familiar and aware of the Caravan Club, but I'm just going to set the scene and tell you a little bit about it. So for most of the span of our collections at the National Archives, same-sex acts between men were criminalised, and various social and cultural practices could be used as evidence against individuals. Nevertheless, what we see through the archive is through the 1920s, 30s, and 40s in particular, a thriving queer community socialised despite the significant risks. And the National Archives holds striking records relating to some of these queer spaces in this era, revealing a hidden network of private members' clubs, pubs, restaurants, and dance halls that provided essentially a sanctuary, especially for men, to meet regardless of the law. And these venues were vital for queer people to socialise, meet, form relationships, friendships. And our records really demonstrate a community that was resistant, resilient, and determined in the face of persecution. Now, one of the most notable examples of from our records is in relation to the Caravan Club, where we have really rich material. So the Caravan Club was described as London's greatest bohemian rendezvous, the most unconventional spot in town. And it opened in 1934 in the basement of 81 Endell Street in Soho, just on the edge of Shaftesbury Avenue. And the club was run by Jack Neave, known as Ironfoot Jack, and William Reynolds, known as Billy. And all-night gaiety could be enjoyed while dancing to the music of Charlie, the club's accordionist. And we can get a sense of this kind of language and the way it was described and marketed through the ticket that we have a surviving copy of in our collections. So we can get a sense of the physicality of this place from some of this material. The dance floor could be found full of people. Metropolitan Police files, which these items come from, indicate that from October 1934, the Caravan Club was kept under regular surveillance due to a number of public complaints about the way it was run. Now, police surveillance commenced over a couple of months, and plainclothes police officers visited the venue. Even at the time, this was quite a controversial practice, but we see it across a number of spaces in this era. And these observations from police give us unique insights into the space through their descriptions and often recording verbatim what people were saying. So one description says, "The small dance floor was crowded and the number was too large to allow dancing properly. Men were dancing with men and women with women. All the couples I saw were acting in a very obscene manner." In the early hours of the morning on the 25th of August 1934, the club was raided. During the raid, 103 individuals, both men and women, were arrested and taken to Bow Street Police Station. And the charge that they faced was corrupting public morals and aiding and abetting. One of the attendees, Cyril Coeur de Lion, approached the police inspector upon being arrested in an extraordinary act of defiance. Cyril said, "Well, I don't mind this beastly raid, but I would like to know if you can let me have one of your nice boys to come home with. I am really good." During the arrest, Cyril had to undergo the humiliating process of having his face tested for evidence of makeup with blotting paper. And this is something we see across a number of spaces that happens to individuals. That's just another picture of the interior as well. In the club and related spaces were also found letters. And in these letters, we can see heartbreak, we can see kind of quite sometimes one-sided relationships, what we might see now as kind of ghosting. And so really kind of human, timeless emotions captured in these letters. And one of the letters is between friends with the powerful words, "I've only been queer since I came to London." So we can follow the case through from the policing files we have, from the Director of Public Prosecution files we have, and we can see that 22 individuals ended up going to court, but only the owners were charged in the end. So they got 12 and 20 months hard labour, respectively. So why am I talking about this case today? So I was lucky enough to come across this material quite a few years ago, fortuitously, and then also discovered the wonderful work of Matt Holbrook, Queer London in particular, and my obsession with these queer spaces, including the Caravan Club, really began. So inspired by this material and what I felt was the lack of knowledge about these amazing spaces, I pitched a project as part of the Being Human Festival with my colleague at the time, Rowena. And we were lucky enough to get funding. It felt like a really timely moment to talk about historic and queer spaces, the kind of importance but also fallibility of them, how and why they were created, and the resistance and need they often grew from. So at the time, as there often is, there was discussions about the closing of venues and their kind of importance. So these are all story papers and headlines from the time that we were pitching the project. So as part of the project, we worked with the London Archives, as they're now known, and also a small but impactful group of young people aged 16 to 25 to help shape the project. So we met the young people regularly and talked over the archive material. Our output was to be an event, but the design and what it looked like was open-ended. And one of the young people suggested, why don't we recreate the Caravan Club? And so we did. And we worked with a set designer and anything we could repurpose in the archives. And the first iteration of the Caravan Club was reborn. So there's a drawing from the initial set designer, Dan, and then our reimagined caravan club from our conference corridor at the time. So the original club was very kind of bohemian and quickly pulled together. And that's pretty much what we did too, working on a pretty tight budget. And the result was a one-day event co-curated by our youth panel. There was a short talk about the Caravan Club and other spaces in our records, a document display, performances from the archive material by Timberlina, and a kind of 1920s inspired dancing troupe. And the London Archives had a mirroring event. We were then lucky enough that the National Trust London team heard about our project and thought we could take things further. So we worked together, and in February 2017, we reopened the Caravan Club back to back with the original location for 6 weeks. And that was at Freud Bar, Shaftesbury Avenue. And it felt quite important that it was 6 weeks that it was open for, because that's actually what the original had been as well. So there was a kind of a nice synergy there. We worked with the brilliant immersive set designers and producers, Harry and Helen at O'Neill Ross. And this is them working away on recreating some of the set there. Working with O'Neill Ross, we've created an atmosphere inspired by the images and descriptions from the archive. So with fabric walls and ceilings, mixed patterns, colours, makeshift furniture. We were working with black and white photographs, so that meant a lot of reimagining and creative interpretation. But as you can see, the atmosphere and the vibe looks pretty similar to the original. The recreated venue acted as a starting point as well for tours of Soho's queer spaces, past and present. In the evening, the venue reopened as the Caravan Society, which the original venue was also known as. And that was for nights of queer cabaret and performance. As visitors entered the smoky packed club, they were introduced to our host, actor, singer and director, Ralph Bogard. And performances included Chris Green playing the legendary musical artist Fred Barnes, who at the time was openly queer and used to perform round the corner at Billy's Club. And then Charlene Taylor-Stone reviving the spirit of the Shim Sham Club, a jazz venue that was really at the heart of queer Black London. And these were spaces that we also have records about at the National Archives. So very much tying into the archive material there as well. So I'm just going to reflect on some of the challenges. So we didn't shy away from the context of the raids, and that could be quite confronting. At the end of the night, a siren sounded and text from the raid was read out. And there was also a police desk at the front of the recreated venue that had facsimile records so people could explore copies of the archival material. It was important to celebrate the space, but to not divorce it from its context and the kind of painful reason that the records do exist. The aim was to do justice to the struggle people face historically. And so there is kind of a contradiction in that and what we were trying to do, and it was a difficult balance. But ultimately seemed very well received. There's an uncomfortable contradiction at the heart of the archive. The policing of LGBTQ plus lives has actually left us, paradoxically, rich and surprising traces of queer experiences in the government record. These are rare and important insights because of the risks involved in individuals preserving materials for themselves in the past. So we continue to use these records and engage people with them in part because we witness the deeply personal ways people connect with them, feel validated in their own experiences and connected to their history. But it is complex. I don't think there are easy answers with this kind of material. We have a duty of care over current audiences interacting with this material and also considerations around the ethics of how we treat people in the archive who have lived through these things. I think ultimately it takes a lot of sensitivity, time, care, resource, and ideally community co-curation to do this in the right way. It's also important to consider the gaps, what we don't know, whose voices are missing, and what other spaces might have existed for even more marginalised communities such as lesbian and trans people. It also struck me when Luke was talking that our records here are very London-centric. We have Metropolitan Police records. That automatically means that there's a kind of London-centric bias in the narratives that we have. And there's also the kind of intangible heritage that the government archives just don't capture, and that's what I guess Luke's project can really powerfully do. So, we have gaps in what our records can say in terms of feelings, relationships, fleeting moments that so often escape the official record. So, bringing lived experiences now into conversation with these archival records helps us, to some extent, rebalance those narratives and what's missing, and helps deepen our understanding. The project's impact was not only in the conversations it sparked about queer spaces, forgotten histories, and reclaimed archive material, but it did ultimately create a powerful sense of community. Reclaiming a space once closed created a setting for present day queer joy and connection. And we ultimately had over 2,000 people visit during its reopening, including the evenings and the tours. The significance and spirit of the project was captured by one visitor who wrote after an evening at the club. For those few nights, a comet blazed across Soho, and all of us had a place where we could be glorious together and set the world on fire. We had the Caravan Society, and I can only hope that its light shines on into the rest of this year. So before I close, I just wanted to reflect more on some of the more recent work I've done and themes. So just to say that I guess my work has spread to kind of other kinds of queer spaces, particularly thinking about print mediums, classified adverts, and how people shape space in those kinds of ways as well to create community and connection. Once again, these records, so the link from the 1920s and the International Times from the late 1960s, exist in our collections because of the policing that they faced. But we can use these items now to have discussions about the enduring importance of connection, how mediums and methods of communication and space making change over time, and again, the kind of community resilience and defiance in the face of the law. The Caravan Club and similar venues were not just physical locations, but sanctuaries, and I'm proud we managed to create a space that made people feel so welcome and accepted. Archives, even state archives, can potentially be spaces for liberatory work, raising awareness of past injustices and creating spaces to bring people together now. So I guess my final takeaway is always work with young people, because this really wouldn't have happened without that kind of imaginative suggestion at the beginning. And I do struggle sometimes with these records and how we work with them when they're so challenging. But I love Luke's idea of the regenerative nature of archives, and I think that's an important point, maybe to end on. So I believe we can now have some questions, and I'll stop sharing my slides.
Thanks, Vicky. That was also extremely interesting and beautiful in the end, although the origin was less joyful. I can see already various questions in the Q&A, which are all extremely interesting, and I hope I can ask most of them. But first of all, I would like to ask one because I've jotted down many keywords as you were speaking, and clearly the words that you mentioned at the end, Vicky, which is also at the end of Luke's presentation, really comes out of this cloud of words that I have written down, and that is regenerative, which I found it extremely interesting because it seems that to me that even if if you both are started working on two very different types of records, I would say, or in the sense that we got police records on one side and we got community memories on the other, they all end up being extremely generative in the sense that they have ended up in the recreation, either physical or digital, of these spaces, which eventually have led people to come to specific places and creating tours. So it has been a real movement. So absences in physical spaces in the present of these spaces has been catalyst and the origin of all this work. And I would like to ask you, also given people's responses to this recreate the spaces, um, how how did they, if they had any response in terms of like the difference between accuracy and accurate reconstruction and imagination? Because I'm sure that with the traces that you have or that you could work with, so these archival traces, there was a lot that could be done, but not all of it. And so there's surely an element of a space for the imagination to come in. How did people relate to this? Have they have any responses?
Um, yeah, I think it's interesting to look at it through lenses. It was interesting seeing Vicky's talk as well, and like seeing a plan of a space is obviously incredible to me because I'm really interested in that, and it's quite rare that I've come across things like that when I've engaged with archives, and I've had to use my skills really as a way to get that out of people and to draw what they describe and collaboratively share that. And of course, the Caravan Club, the way that's been documented and recorded, is interestingly very through the lens of criminalization, and it's through policing. Um, and I think in my work, it's about recognizing that within institutional records, our history is documented through those lenses, and then trying to spin that on its head in a way, and actually empower communities to look at their individual memories. So every time I have to spend a lot of time in these sort of engagement sessions, making them feel comfortable to share and to actually be like, you are right, because a lot of people will doubt themselves on what they know and what they remember. But actually, as they open up about things, their mind wanders and they can elaborate on more and more things. But then interestingly, when we have, say, group discussions and people remember things differently, or when we've created these illustrations and then shared them publicly, and I always love seeing how people react to them and respond to them, and the conflicts that they have. And there'll be I've had up to five people before around one of the drawings, each slightly disagreeing with like where something was. And I think there's something quite beautiful about that, of like how each of them remember distinctively something because of their personal experience. It could be an interaction they had on that night. So then therefore they personally resonate around a certain part of it. And I just think it's really interesting to view place as a memory through that lens, and to actually yeah, empower people to remember it, because if it isn't documented, there's no other way of us seeing and understanding it. So I think celebrating those individual um memories is quite a powerful tool for people to engage with, and it also gives a starting point for people to then question it, critique it, and argue with each other.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I guess in a way, it's all about starting those conversations and getting people discussing and remembering. And I think that's wonderful. And yeah, I don't know. I guess accuracy in itself is an interesting word because everyone's memories and experiences of these places are valid. So I feel quite jealous that you get to speak to people that have living memories of these places. Like I guess that's what we don't have with the Caravan Club. But equally, I guess we have in some ways more accurate material about the physicality of the space and things like that, where photographs and plans survive. But I'd rather they didn't survive. I'd rather they weren't policed. And so it's really that contradiction. It gives us wonderful detail, but it comes from that kind of place of pain and struggle. So yeah, it's complex, isn't it? The kind of the ideas about accuracy and actually why we know it's accurate is kind of a problematic and not nice reason. So yeah, but there were certainly still things we had to kind of fill in with creativity and um, reimagine. But I think we were lucky enough to have the level of detail that made that relatively minimal in that case.
Um, yeah, so I'd like to move now into like some of these questions here because what you just mentioned is super interesting in terms of like engaging with the community. So the first question I have related to community engagement is for Luke, and So the question, which I also find it extremely interesting, is um, whether the project, If These Walls Could Talk, has any space for advocacy and visibility with the non-queer community, so that they have a better understanding of who we are and collectively work towards a future without othering. I find that queer history, like the queer audience, tend to be quite sensitive and to this and attend. But what about the non-queer community? Have you thought of anything?
Definitely. And it goes back to the concept behind it because I think when we did the Queer Places exhibition, for example, which was it was in an architect studio which I worked with, and they had a space which they let us use. So we featured within there for over Pride Month in 2024 for the summer. And I think I realized there, particularly on the people who were engaging with it and attending, it, as I said, it was really transformative for the project because it meant a lot of queer people were finding us and able to come into that space and to share things, to learn things, and to really gather things for us to move on to collect more and understand more. But then at the same time, there was kind of this inner silo of like looking inwards as a community. And I think history is so important, particularly when you think about the context of the world right now, of the erasure, particularly of trans lives and identities, and often viewing queerness as a new thing and something that is new and modern and contemporary and where actually it isn't. And we know through our research, and I'm sure many people on this call know that it has it is something that has a longer history, but because people can't necessarily connect with it or they don't see it, I think it's a lot harder for people in their minds who maybe don't know queer people to do that, and then therefore to have negative attitudes. So the whole concept for the trail is really bringing this history into the streets and meeting people where they're at. So like one of the sites, for example, is on Bold Street in Liverpool, which is quite a prominent, a really important street in Liverpool, which is a really important like primary sort of street where people sort of move through from the top end to the bottom end of town. And having a display on that site, for example, I think will have a lot of visibility. And we've worked really closely with a trans artist there to bring their personal collection into the window and to display that and to show the incredible work and collection that she has gathered over her lifetime. Because I think like what a better way to show that this legacy and what is there. And yeah, and I think that is the key thing in the trail is trying to be a bit more opening the door to people and having these windows and portals through the city where people can pass by and engage with more casually, rather than expecting people to come to us and to find us in the back of a big old building somewhere that's hard to find.
And Vicky, talking about again communities, here's like a bit of the opposite question, which is how did you go about finding and approaching queer communities regarding potential contributions, especially when it comes to working with state archives? You already tapped on it a little bit, but if you could articulate a bit more, what can help building trust, and if you have encountered any particular challenge, and or on the opposite, if there's any challenge that you envisioned that in the end didn't, like the community you worked with helped you, and showing that it was less of a challenge than you thought at the beginning.
Yeah, so in terms of kind of the young people we work with, we just did a call out for them, spread it through all our kind of queer heritage networks, and tried to do that. Um, Otherwise, and I mean that I guess that was mediumly successful. Like we got a really good group of highly engaged people, but it was a small group. And obviously they were giving time in kind of evenings. So that was quite tricky in that way. I think often it's the practicalities, not the desire not to engage, that can make these things difficult. In general, there are definitely barriers around engaging people in government archives because of a natural distrust of kind of institutions and The National Archives, for people that don't know, is the actual physical building, is a big kind of brutalist building. It looks quite imposing in itself. So there are barriers there, but I think sometimes I've kind of overplayed the barriers in my own head, and actually people are really willing to engage once they find what we've got and that it's relevant and interesting. So yeah, I think there's a balance there, I guess. Like we need to try and absolutely meet people where they're at and take things out of the archives, but also actually I think people can be very open-minded when they know that we have wonderful materials that we want to just share and get out there and are relevant. So yeah, I think something like the Caravan Club really helped because we were getting outside of the institution, trying to break down a lot of barriers. We had facsimiles in the room, but really it was about trying to kind of bring something to life and create a space. So that certainly worked. But yeah, the amount of resource to do a project like that is quite a lot. So yeah, we need to try and find, I guess, more sustainable ways of doing those kind of things all the time and ingraining them so that we can break down those barriers.
Thanks, Vicky. I'm conscious of time and I have to close, but there's really another question I would really like to ask. It's for Luke. There are many others. I apologize with everyone who has asked question. We won't be able to ask today, but you can probably get in touch with the speakers if they are happy for you to do so. The final question is, clearly the caravan was a recreation, a physical recreation, which meant like it being temporary, and nowadays it is not possible to experience that. Perhaps one day maybe it will be recreated. But look, your work is digital, and the question is about your digital archive. Questions about digital preservation and sustainability of the digital archive that you have created, and the person is also asking whether what decision you have made in terms of copyright.
Yeah, brilliant question. I think, well, the whole reason we started with the digital archive in the beginning was really a way of, because I am not an archivist. I'm not associated with any sort of institution or necessarily trained in that background. So for me, I obviously have to treat this work really sensitively and carefully. And the point of the digital archive was really as a way of, in this stage of the project, of really empowering and listening to the community. And again, going back to the theme of the emotions within the archive, for those that are living who hold this in their homes, they have a lot of connection to a lot of the records and the document, and a lot of them are personal photographs from their lifetime. So for me, it was very, how can we start to publicly share this information that people have in their homes, and to put it on a platform where they feel comfortable with that. So at the moment, the digital platform has scans and copies of the records, and I leave them with the rightful owners. But the idea is to work with these communities in the future, and there's definitely the future of the project is to find more sustainable ways of doing it. And but at the end of the day, there's an ownership of the work, and it is people's lived memories, and a lot of the people I've engaged with, particularly around thinking of institution and community archiving, is being able to access their collection, their personal stuff, because once it's kind of signed over to somebody else, they feel they lose ownership of it. So yeah, it's very challenging. I don't have all the answers yet, but it is definitely something that I really want to explore more and to continue involving with.
Thanks so much. And I'm sorry we are exiting time, but I just wanted to really thank you, Luke and Vicky, for joining us today and for providing insight into your incredible and innovative work. Um, and I would like to thank you also, the audience, for joining today and for engaging so actively with questions. We have 4 more Research Roots events to come, so please join us for our next event, which is Extinction and Hope, Navigating Animal Encounters in the Archive, which is happening on the 20th of October, again online. There's an in-person workshop called about recording and remixing history, Second World War soundscapes, and that takes place on the 28th of October. And you can find more information on our website. We have also created a resource pack, which is based on this session, and that will include information and links to records, articles, and networks and material here at TNA. And you can find it linked in the chat, but we will also email it after the event. We hope that you have been inspired by our Research Roots series and by today's event, and that you will engage with our collections in new and innovative ways, focusing on feelings and collaborations. A lot of potential collaborations are happening in the chat. Have a great week, and we hope to see you at a future research event at the National Archives event. Thank you.